Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video I have a Ret Paladin guide for Mythic Plus in general, and specifically for 9.1. 9.1 has interesting effects, and some interesting systems, I guess. I don't know if interesting is the right word, that makes 9.1 a little bit unique, so I will be getting into the uniqueness of 9.1 as well. I'm not a huge Mythic Plus guy as far as like a fan. I think it could use developed a lot more and improved upon. However, I am asked about this a lot, so I did want to just convey some information for Ret Paladins and Mythic Plus. So the first thing I think we should probably address here is it is very hard to get invited to Mythic Plus as Ret, just in general, like to PuGs and stuff like that. We have really good damage. We're going to be, if you're a really skilled player, you're going to keep up with most other classes. There's going to be some that you just can't keep up with if they're also really good, right? But so you have good damage, but not elite damage in Mythic Plus. You know, tier wise, A tier or whatever instead of S tier or whatever. So you have good damage, but then you don't bring heroism, you don't bring battle res, you don't bring invisibility. Like a rogue or something like that. So you don't bring a ton to the group as Ret. And so the number one thing you'll probably hear is to go holy or tank, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about doing Mythic Plus as Ret. And if you do these things, you'll get more invites, you'll make friends, and hopefully it makes the experience a little bit better, because I do know pugging as Ret is not fun experience at all, as well as some other specs as well that are in the game. So let's go ahead and start off talking about the talents for Mythic Plus. So one thing I do like about Ret is it has some variation of stuff. So in the first tier, in most of my guide videos, especially Ret Paladin videos, I'll kind of say stuff that's by the book, right? The correct answer, the answer that's in the back of the book. But I'll also kind of give you some opinions and some nuance as well. So in the first tier, you would normally pick Zeal for Mythic Plus. In the second tier, you would normally pick Empyrean Power. In the third tier is a lot of interesting choices depending on what your group needs. I like to just run Fist of Justice, but depending on your need of your group, actually all three of these are good, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. In this next tier, honestly, Unbreakable Spirit's probably the best one. I've just been running Cavalier a lot in this expansion for whatever reason in all content, but Unbreakable Spirit's really good. And the next tier, obviously, you want your Seraphim, and final tier, you want Final Reckoning. In this tier, normally there's choices. In rating, some people pick Selfless Healer, for example, but Healing Hands is definitely the choice in this tier, and I guess I'll get into that as I get more specific through these. So why is Zeal the choice? So Zeal is the choice because you're using your Divine Storm so much in a Mythic Plus that execution sentence is fine during Divine Storm, but you're obviously going to get more damage out of it by using Templar's Verdict. So you really only keep maximizing your execution sentence on like a boss, right? And when you're doing mobs, the issue is you're going to be killing them at different times when you're execution sentencing one of them. So just in generally speaking, Zeal is going to be the best choice here. You're going to get more use out of it. You're going to get less inconsistency by not having one target dying really quickly. But however, there are some cases where execution sentence can be good. Against tyrannical bosses, execution sentence can be pretty decent, right? Even though maybe there's only 4 bosses in the raid, it's going to increase your damage on those 4 bosses. However, it becomes an issue based on the affixes, right? You don't want to be using it, when there's Sanguine, when there's bolstering. You don't want something to die way earlier than everything else and potentially heal or potentially, bolster and make them stronger. And so that's why it's not the best choice. However, if the affixes were inspiring and storming, for example, just throw those two together, all of a sudden, especially if you're pulling the inspired mobs in, execution sentence becomes okay. So I would say it's very niche to use execution sentence in Mythic Plus setting, but you can find use for it. The other issue is literally mobs dying too. So let's say you're picking it because it's tyrannical week. The mobs won't be as strong, obviously, in like a plus 15, and they might die before the execution sentence even hits. So again, it just becomes a waste. If you want to do the most, you should probably go with Zeal here. The next group here, yeah, mostly you're gonna pick Empyrean Power just because you're gonna be pressing Divine Storm so much throughout a Mythic Plus dungeon. This one's fairly obvious. You know, you're just Divine Storming a lot, and so Empyrean Power becomes pretty good to use here. Blade of Wrath is fine to use if you want. This is more just like maxing out your damage, I suppose. This next here is actually a lot more interesting. So Fist of Justice, I like to use this because you can kind of lock down one mob. You can interrupt the first cast, hodge the second cast, interrupt the third cast, and then maybe someone fills in the fourth cast, and maybe your hodge is up again because you're, you know, decreasing the cooldown every, you know, for every holy power you spend or whatever. Repentance, however, can be good as well because Repentance is a form of CC. We just talked about Inspiring. You could perhaps CC the Inspiring map with Repentance. And then Blinding Light can be good because it can be a mass interrupt. If there's multiple casters in a pole and you don't have an AoE stun, you can use this and interrupt them all. Now, they will immediately start casting because it's going to be broken immediately. But if your group really needs that, it is an option for you. So this row is very helpful for Mythic Plus, and you should definitely put some thought into it before you go into your dungeon. The next tier, it's pretty pretty obvious that Unbreakable Spirit's probably the best one here. You can run Cavalier if you want, I suppose, if you're trying to just go fast or something, but Unbreakable Spirit's probably the best one there. Seraphim, that's just the most damage. It lines up well with everything else. Healing Hands. So the reason why this is so good is if you're a selfless healer person, you've probably resisted maybe playing Healing Hands. But Word of Glory becomes so strong, and in a 5-man setting, you can carry healing as a rep paladin for a while, especially if your wings are going. Now, you don't normally want to waste your damage on healing, but if the healer dies and you know the boss is almost dead, you can carry the healing with Word of Glory, and so this is a very good talent for Mythic Plus. And the final tier, you're still going to go with Final Reckoning. It has an AoE component, it has a single target component. It's just a really, really strong, good talent that they added. So Final Reckoning is pretty much going to be the go-to choice at the bottom. So, you know, I'll switch that over there. In most of your Mythic Plus runs, this would be your talents, basically. So, and PvP talents obviously don't matter for Mythic Plus. Next, let's talk about Covenant, Conduits, and Soulbind. So, as you can see, I'm here in the Kyrian Covenant, and this is, of course, the best Covenant for Ret Paladins, regardless of what you're doing, really, in this X-Spec. Now, that might be different if you're a different spec, but for Ret, Kyrian is the way to go. That being said, the best Soulbind is still going to be Pelagos. I would not say that Forge Light Prime is unplayable or anything like that, and you know, you do have the cool little knockback feature as well. But Pelagos will just do the most damage for this. So that's going to be the way to go there. And then as far as conduits go, it's very similar to other things. You're going to want your Ring and Clarity. You're going to want your Virtuous Command. The change would be you don't really want your Templar's Vindication. I like to run Expurgation. And I don't mind this new conduit either. You could just, the Adaptive Armor Fragment, you could actually just sim these in the Dungeon Cleave if all you care about is the most damage. Other than that, for this one, you know, you just want to use something that's versatile and that you're going to get a lot of use out of. So, you know, Expurg's a pretty safe choice to go there as your third conduit. I like to be a little bit tankier. As you can see, I have 3, you know, defensive or endurance conduit selected. I like to play a little bit defensive in Mythic Plus myself, but that's more of a choice, I suppose. You could run finesse as well, and you know, there's some interesting choices there. I guess nothing too powerful, but you know, just depends on what your group needs, what you need. But damage wise, you know, like I said, Ring, Clarity, Virtuous Command, and then you know, Expurg. You can sim these, but that's pretty much going to be your choices there. I think that's it for Covenant stuff. So now let's talk about Legendaries. So this is actually one that... So Divine Resonance has had a lot of pushback. I assume by more of the casual players. But Divine Resonance is going to be your best Legendary for Mythic Plus, generally speaking. Because it's good in AoE. It's not amazing in AoE anymore. But it's good in AoE. And it's obviously good in single target as well. So... why is it good in AoE? Because it's still giving you extra holy power for more Divine Storms. So what actually ends up being the case is for 2 to 3 targets, Divine Resonance is actually better than your AoE legendary Tempest of the Lightbringer. At 4 targets, Tempest of the Lightbringer comes better. So yes, for big trash pulls, Tempest of the Lightbringer is better. But for bosses, it's pretty much completely worthless. For most bosses, not all bosses. but for most bosses, it's pretty much worthless. So just as an overall legendary, you would want to use Divine Resonance. On a fortified week, on a heavy trash dungeon with big pulls, I mean, your target cap is still 5 anyways, but 4 or 5 targets for Divine Storm, then you can use Tempest of Lightbringer. It's not that you can't. If you, however, also it should be worth saying, if you aren't Kyrian and you don't have access to Divine Resonance, then Tempest of Lightbringer should just be your go-to in Mythic Plus. It's not so much that Tempest of Lightbringer isn't good, it's just that Divine Resonance is very good and it just like overtakes it. And before it was nerfed, it was actually better than Tempest of Lightbringer, even at 4 targets or 5 targets. So it was just better than it. So Tempest is still usable on like fortified week, like I said, where you're doing always where all the pulls are 4 or 5 targets. It is usable, but it's just very safe pick to use Divine Resonance, frankly. Next, let's talk a little bit about the Season 2 affix. So the Season 2 affix is Tormented. We have these lieutenants that are scattered across the dungeons. And what's cool about these things is they're good for rep because we have these 1-minute burst windows and we can really pump damage into them if we need to. You can use your wings on them if the situation permits, and you can really get these down fast. And ret is actually very good for this particular affix. And so I'm going to talk about the anima powers choices for these, which ones you should be choosing, and any kind of like little tips that I have for each of the lieutenants. So first we have Sagadon the Breaker. Sagadon the Breaker, he's the one that pulls you in and puts the chains on the whole group or whatever. What I like to do here is I do typically use my 1 minute on these, and occasionally I'll use my 2 minutes, especially if I see that my group's struggling with a particular type of mechanic or whatever, or maybe the healer's struggling in a dungeon for the flame guy. Maybe I'll use my 2 minutes as well if they're up, but I do normally use at least my 1 minute. So what I like to do is I wait on Sagadon the Breaker. I like to wait till he's about to do the polling cast and just use my Final Reckoning on that. So I do my whole rotation, Final Reckoning on the chains that pretty much just breaks everybody out immediately. And then, cast as far as I can into it before he does his mass AoE thing and then run out. The other option there is you can also bop there yourself and avoid the damage. It is physical damage, and you can just stay in and keep DPSing him. That's another option for you. If you don't mind just blowing your bop for that, that is something you can do for Sagadon. As far as his power that he drops, you're always going to want to choose Stone Ward there. That power is just extremely powerful. I'm pretty sure everybody picks that I know of at least. Pretty much every class spec combo picks Stone Ward because it's just really, really, really good. So that's Sagadon the Breaker. Next one we'll talk about is Incinerator Arcalath. Incinerator Arcalath, he's the fire guy, thus the name Incinerator. And there's nothing really special here for Ret Paladins. It's just damage. He's usually going to target a ranged with his like little fire ability, Circle Fire Patch. So in most cases, if you're in a full melee group, maybe he always targets the healer. Maybe he targets a melee. I'm not sure. I haven't actually done with a full melee group. But yeah, so there's nothing really special here. As far as power goes, Champion's Brand is always going to pretty much be the number one power to take off of Incinerator Arcalath for Ret Paladins. Next we have Oros Coldheart, so the ice guy. So this guy, what he does is he slows everybody down. He does a frontal ice beam, and then he will put swirlies behind players in the group, and you can't get hit by those. And then you just DPS them down. Again, I like to use my 1 minute or 2 minutes on these guys just to make them a little bit easier for the group. Blessing of Freedom is your friend here to dodge either of those mechanics I was talking about. And if the power you want to use here typically is the interrupt one. So you interrupt the boss, any but thing, and you get a damage increase. Damage increase, good. However, what I will say is there will be times in the dungeon where Oros is towards the end of the dungeon. Maybe there's one trash pack and then you have the final boss. Unless the final boss itself has an interrupt available for you, then Oros might not be the best one. I guess a good example might be I'm trying to think of where the best dungeon example would be. I want to say Sanguine Depths, but I'm not sure if that's correct. There's dungeons where the final one is right before the last boss, though. And in that case, if there's no interrupt on the final boss, then this power doesn't really help you. And you could just choose one of the other ones, the defensive one, that if you take a big chunk of damage, or you can just choose the healing one that heals you when you take damage. They're not great powers, from this guy in general. But yeah, most of the time you'll want to be choosing the handbook, just so you have at least an opportunity of damage, especially if it's early in the dungeon. It also encourages you to use your interrupt. Then the last lieutenant is Executioner Varuth. So this guy is actually pretty easy. So you can he does like a fear based thing where you stack up with everybody in your group, but then he immediately does like a carnage attack where he really hits hard, and you don't want to be near anybody else. It'll have a red circle around you. Now, the one issue Red has is we are kind of slow. So if you're stacked up to the group and you're not quick to move out, you could hit your group members, or you could hit somebody else, or someone could hit you because you don't move like the opposite way of them fast enough. Just not having a blink type ability or a rush type ability can make it a little bit awkward. What I suggest is just don't stack directly on your group. You don't have to be on somebody directly for the fear. Just stack, a slight stack, and try to make sure you're a little bit by yourself, and just be ready to take a few steps back if you do get the red circle. Obviously, if everyone's really kind, they'll just move out and allow you to keep meleeing. However, in pug groups, that's just not the case a lot of times. Just be ready to step a few steps out with the red circle immediately, and then get back in and doing damage. Now, this guy actually drops all of the really, really good powers. So we'll go over all of them. So Plumage is just volcanic, the affix. This is really good for interrupts, mass interrupts, and it does really good AoE damage as well. So on fortified weeks, I like to pick Plumage because this is really good for, big packs. It hits everything. It interrupts all the mobs. They have a lot of health. They do a lot of damage. This is good. Necrotic is very good for tyrannical bosses. It ends up being a very large portion of your boss damage, especially on bosses where you only are single targeting the whole time and you're just on the boss the whole time. These necrotic stacks can be quite strong. They become a lot less useful on trash mobs, of course. So very, very strong on bosses and not so strong. So it's like the opposite of Plumage, right? So I like to go literally on fortified. I pick Plumage. On tyrannical, I pick necrotic. You can always pick Plumage and be pretty safe doing that. That is definitely an option for you. But I just like to do kind of like what's best for the group, I think. And at least the pugs that I do, that's what's best for the group. Champions Brand's also available here. We talked about that earlier. That's a good ability as well. And I guess if it was a tyrannical week and you're in a dungeon where you're not on the bosses, have full uptime on the boss, then maybe Champion's Brand would be fine. But I definitely suggest, especially if it's early in the dungeon, you want to pick Plumage or the necrotic one. The last thing we'll talk about here is Shards of Domination. So it's another 9.1 thing. And we do not have 3 set bonuses in Mythic Plus. So it's only for like the raid and Torghast and stuff. So if you have access to these, I'm just going to go in the order of which are the strongest, right, for Mythic Plus. The number 1 shard to equip if you can. They drop in raid, but you can get, a piece from like Korthi and stuff. So the number 1 thing you want to use for Mythic Plus is the Frost Damage Shard. So this is the one that when you target, I can look at it real quick here. I'm sure I have it on. So your damage is increased by, for me, I upgraded a little bit, 2.25% for 20 seconds when attacking enemy you have not yet damaged. So obviously, as you're moving through a Mythic Plus dungeon, you're constantly attacking new enemies. This one's going to get the most use. It's not as useful on bosses, but again, it's kind of like using Empyrean Power. You're just using Divine Storm so much. You're attacking new targets so much in a Mythic Plus that it's good. In bosses, sometimes summon adds, in which case this gets activated as well. And so it's a very good Mythic Plus shard to use. The second one would be the Blood Damage Shard, which does damage when you are 50% or more health than your target. And then the Damage Unholy Shard would be your third choice. So if you're rocking all 3 of those, that's great. I think as far as the defensive go, so if you are a raider, even though you don't have the 3 set active, you would actually kind of do the same thing you do for a raid and just go ahead and use Unholy. Because the 2 Unholy Shards I think are the best, like as far as like defensive type shards. So if you have access to using 5 shards, you'd want to use 3 unholies and then the 2 damage of the other type. Lastly, I'm just going to leave you with a few tips and tricks, I suppose. So the number one thing is use your Cleanse Toxins ability. This will help out your healers a lot. There's a lot of places where you can use it. I mean, almost every dungeon has some scenario where you cleansing toxins will help your healer out quite a lot. So use that ability. It's part of what makes Ret Paladin strong, is that we have some utility. We don't have the big thing. We don't have the battle res. We don't have the heroism or the bloodlust, but we do have a cleanse that's actually useful. So make sure you're using that anytime you can to help out, whether you're just dispelling yourself or you're dispelling others. Turn Evil can have its place. So a lot of paladins probably don't even use this ability. We actually have a conduit for it as well. And I actually think I have it socketed on Forge Light. We'll look at that real quick. Yeah, so it decreases the cast time. The one I have decreases it by 72%. It makes it like a point something cast really fast. So why would this be useful? You don't want to just be spamming this on mobs. It's a fear. It's going to fear them into other mobs. However, the first boss in Plaguefall, Klobgrog, he summons these slimes that come to Beckon Slime. You can actually go ahead and use your fear on the slimes. Now, I was in a group where we really didn't have a lot of options on the slimes, and so I actually was in charge of just fearing away the big slime. And you know, it works. Now you can only have one fear at a time, which becomes an issue if another slime comes. You can't fear both of them, but you can manage that ad pretty well, and it's a long fear. It'll go running off in the distance somewhere, and it's fine. And there's other instances where it's useful as well. I believe in Necrotic Wake, the second boss, it's useful, and it could just be useful. Just be prepared to use it. Be prepared to have it. If your group needs it, let them know it's an option. If they say, well, wait, how are we going to deal with the first boss in Plaguefall? You'd be like, oh, well, I can do the first slime, the first big slime. I got it covered with my Turn Evil. So that's an option there. Just something to throw out there that most people don't really think about. Let's see. You can use Bop for many things, for example, but like I said, you could use it to prevent your own physical damage and keep DPSing against that one tormented boss or lieutenant. But you can also use it to like remove necrotic stacks. Now this is a little bit more advanced, but like your tank would have to be ready for it, right? So you'd have to, if your tank is if you notice your tank is struggling with necrotic stacks, you can tell them, hey, I can bop you, and just be ready to click it off. Do you want me to bop you at a certain number of stacks? If I see you at 50 stacks, do you just want to bop and you can click it off and regain aggro? That's the issue with doing it, is you don't want the mobs just to start one-shotting everything when it happens. So you do have to have some communication, have some plan if you're going to actually be doing something like that. We already talked about it a little bit when we talked about healing hands, but Word of Glory, don't be afraid to help heal your group. If your healer is struggling, if you're in a pug and your healer is struggling for whatever reason, don't be afraid to help heal the group. You have that power as a rat. Yes, it'll hurt your damage, but everyone's going to notice that you're really helping the group and are going to think you're pretty cool for doing it. So, and if you're in a group where you completely carry the healing, utility healing with WOG, and they don't notice it and they say your damage was crap, then that's just a terrible experience. I understand, but if it helps you get the dungeon done or get the dungeon timed, then that can be a good thing to do. So, as a paladin, the last thing will be, as a paladin, we have so many spells. We have so much utility. We have Lay on Hands. We have Blessing of Sacrifice, which I didn't even mention. You can sacrifice and bubble with sacrifice on a tank, for example. You have so many things that you can do. Bops for certain things, and a Blessing of Freedom somebody else, WOG, Turn Evil, Repentance, Blinding Light. Those are options that a lot of people don't pick, including me sometimes. These are all options that we have. We have a lot of utility if we know how to use it and if we choose to use it. And the more you master these things, the more likely someone's going to invite a rat to their group in the future. So when you go into a dungeon, if you're competitive on the damage, whether that's competitive in the first place or just barely behind second place, but you're also off healing and you're doing a lot of cool things to help the dungeon be easier for everybody else, then that's going to increase the chance that that person, you know, invites a rat paladin in the future. So be prepared to use all your abilities, master all your abilities, and just, you know, just play as well as you can, and that's going to help everybody who plays rat paladin get invited, especially to pug groups. If you have your own group, then, you know, it's not as big of an issue. So that's about it for this video. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. Helps me out so much. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.